Hello, YouTube. The homeland of the Armenians is the Armenian highlands, located between Asia Minor, the Iranian plateau, and the Mesopotamia. Since the ancient times, there have been two states on the territory of the Armenian highlands, the Greater Armenia and Little Armenia. The Greater Armenia consisted of 15 naangs, or regions. The territory of the present Republic of Armenia occupies approximately 30,000 square kilometers and accommodates only a few naangs of historical Armenia. Traces of human habitation have been preserved here since the early Paleolithic period. The oldest tools have been found, the age of which exceeds 800,000 years, and sites to prove it are Mount Artin, Arzny, etc. The Armenian highlands is one of the oldest centers of agriculture and cattle breeding, metalworking, ancient civilizations, and temple structures. And we will speak about some very unusual ancient civilizations, in my opinion. Armenians are Indo-European people. After the separation from the Indo-European community, the process of ethnogenesis of the Armenian people began, which ended at the end of the second millennium BC. The first historical information about the Armenian highlands dates back to the third millennium BC. Sumerian inscriptions mention the early state formation of Arata, later known as Ararat, Arman, Armi, Urumi, Urartu. In some Mesopotamian sources of the third millennium BC, the same country in the Akkadian part is called Subur. In Sumerian, it was called Haya. The name is identical to the later self-designation of the Armenian people. The first information about the Armenian highlands dates back to the 14th century BC. According to some scientists, there were Nairi states in the Lake Van Basin and the states of Hayasa and Alti in the nearby mountains. In the 19th century BC, an alliance was formed with the self-named Bianili or Bianele. The Assyrians called it Urartu, and the Hebrews called it Ararat. The first Armenian state emerged as a result of the demise of the Urartu Union states immediately after the fall of the Assyrian Empire in 612 BC. In ancient times, a very developed civilization was clearly present on the territory of modern Armenia, long before the appearance of the states known and described in the history textbooks, as evidenced by numerous finds of archaeologists. Let's recall some of them. The ancient metallurgical center of Metsamor, for example, in 1968, was discovered in Metsamor, the oldest settlement. It was formed at the end of the 4th millennium BC, and that's when the Soviet archaeologists discovered the world's oldest metallurgical plant, which served more than 200 blast furnaces. This ancient metallurgical center has existed since the 3rd millennium BC. Materials found during excavations have shown that products made of copper, lead, zinc, iron, gold, tin, manganese, and bronze were made here. The ancient plant actually is located only 24 kilometers from Mount Ararat. Who created or brought metallurgy technology here is still being discussed and has several hypotheses. Studies of the Armenian rock art present in the territory of modern Armenia. Historic Armenia was 10 times larger, having 300,000 square feet kilometer. Well, they show that the Armenians were interested in heavenly bodies of celestial objects and phenomena. The earth, the sun, the moon, planets, comets, Milky Way, stars, constellations are reflected in these pictures, drawn on rocks and mountains around Lake Sivan and elsewhere in Armenia. These pictures and drawings are being studied by a number of historians, archaeologists, and astronomers. In 1972, 3,500-year-old skulls with traces of complex cranial operations were discovered in Armenia. Evidence has been found that surgeons of those ancient times were able to perform complex operations, plunging the patient into a deep sleep with the help of the smell of certain plants. As a tool, these doctors used forceps made of obsidian, a black stone of volcanic origin that could be sharpened to the sharpest state. In this context, it is necessary to perceive the information that doctors at that time already knew how to do trepanation and successfully used implantation of animal bones to replace damaged bone tissue in humans. These amazing discoveries were then widely discussed in the media and the scientific community. However, no serious explanation has been found for them, as indeed the state is the same today. Skulls of traces of ancient surgical intervention continue to be found in Armenia. One of them is now in the museum of the city of Yerevan. A small hole is neatly drilled in the upper part of the head. Plastic surgeon, candidate of medical sciences, Haik Anokyan, believes that by the nature of the hole and the bone, it can be concluded that the operation was performed in vivo, with the help of an ancient drilling surgical instrument, as indicated by the edges of the wound. Probably at that time they tried to do what, according to modern terminology, is called decompression, trepanation of the skull, which in today's medicine is done to save the patient's life. During the excavations of the Areni cave in the Vayots Dzor region, archaeologists found the oldest shoes ever discovered made of threaded leather, perfectly preserved shoes, which are 1,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, at least according to those who believe when it was created, the uniform scientific explanation. But I will not go into this here. I made videos about it. Anyway, and 400 years older than the Stonehenge in the United Kingdom. They were found in one of the caves of Armenia. These sandals, already 5,500 years old, are the oldest pair of leather shoes on earth, made of single piece of cowhide divided into 2 layers, processed and stitched. The sandals contained grass, although archaeologists were not entirely sure as to whether this was to keep the foot warm or maintain the shape of the shoe. It is unknown whether the shoes belonged to a man or a woman, said the study's lead archaeologist. We thought initially that the shoes and other objects were about 600 to 700 years old because they were in such good condition, according to Dr. Pinhesi. The true age was found only when the material was taken for examination by 2 radiocarbon laboratories in Oxford, UK, and California, USA. And we realized that the shoes were made several hundred years older than the shoes worn by Yotzi, the Iceman. To determine the absolute age of the shoes, 3 samples were taken and all 3 tests resulted in the same results. Interestingly enough, the shoes are similar to the traditional Armenian shoes known as charoch, a type of moccasin still in popular use in Armenia. Archaeological finds on the territory of Armenia, in the area of the shallow part of Lake Sivan, conducted back in the 1950s, raised a number of questions in science, many of which still have no answer. Sivan is a high mountain lake in Armenia. It is located at an altitude of 1,900 meters. The area is 1,240 square kilometers. The depth is up to 83 meters. Interestingly, as many as 28 rivers flow into the lake, and the Hrazdan River, a tributary of the Araks, flows out. 4,000-year-old obsidian razors were found on the shores of Lake Sivan, which were so sharp they couldn't be shaven even today, meaning you can use them to do shaves even today. The ancient settlement near the village of Chashen was discovered in 1956. When, as a result of the shallowing of the high altitude Lake Sivan, an entire archaeological complex threw down to be on the land. On the exposed bottom of the lake, the remains of buildings and tombs were revealed. Such cultural riches were found in the graves that all the previously existing doctrines were overthrown in one fell swoop. There is a hypothesis that civilization in these places appeared long before Urartu, and we'll talk about it, ancient Rome and Greece. The revision of dating continues to this day. Chashen is a complex of archaeological monuments of the pre-Urartian period, a Central Caucasian archaeological culture from the 3rd millennium BC to the Middle Ages. The complex consists of Cyclopean fortress before the 7th century AD, and then on to from 9th to 13th centuries. Settlements, burial grounds, many mounds, cromlechs, ground burials, and stone boxes. Since 1956, an archaeological expedition led by Harutun Mnatsakanyan has been working on the exposed part of the coast in the village of Chashen. The ancient settlement had a system of straight streets on both sides of which there were dwellings with round and quadrangular bases. A cuneiform inscription of the Urartian king Argishti I was found, which mentions his capture of the city of Ishtikuni. Ishtikuni was probably the Urartian name of Chashen. In the necropolises at the bottom of Lake Sivan, chariots, carts, household items, gold and silver jewelry, inlaid with precious stones, a strange object made of bronze, which was called the image of the universe, as well as skeletons of people, which were dated to the 3rd millennium BC, were found. Most of the artifacts of Chashen are currently stored in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia, and the Historical Museum of Armenia in Yerevan. The analysis of the gold jewelry showed that they were made of local gold mined at the Zod mine on the shore of Sevan. The found chariots on spokes, now stored in the Historical Museum of Armenia, were made of Arad cedar, a very strong wood that can withstand the stress of running horses. Scientists have recognized their great similarity to the chariots of the Hyksos, people who captured Lower Egypt in the 17th century BC. Only the Chashen ones were found they're 1,000 years older. The richest burials on the territory of Transcaucasia of the Middle Bronze Age belong to the Trialet Vanadzor culture from 2200 to 1500 BC. They were found everywhere where excavations were carried out between the Kura and the Arax rivers. This culture arose after the Kuro-Arax culture from 4000 through 2200 BC. The finds from these rich burials were very impressive, sensational, but in the 20th century they were dated only to the 16th, 15th centuries BC, during the heyday of the Hittite kingdom, and therefore it was believed that all this was imported to Armenia from Asia Minor, or Minor, and the production of local artifacts was formed as a result of the cultural influence of the Hittite culture. But when at the beginning of the 21st century archaeologists clarified the dates, it turned out that they were much older. They should be dated 6 to 8 centuries older, that is the 23rd to 21st century, which means earlier than the 19th century, before beginning of Christianity, despite the fact that historians attribute the foundation and the beginning of the formation of the Hittite kingdom to the 18th to 19th century BC. So it became clear that the objects of the Trialet Vanadzor culture were created much earlier than the Hittite world was formed. Therefore, if there is a certain commonality between Hittite and local culture, then it is already necessary to change the direction of influence, not from Asia Minor to Armenia, but from Armenia to the Hittites, because they're younger. However, in Soviet times, no one dared to talk about the influence of the pre-Urartian civilization on the entire Middle East. Even the existence of a state in an earlier period was not officially recognized. They talked only about the local Hurrian tribes with a rich culture. They did not even dare to call them Armenians, although it was recognized that they were undoubtedly the ancestors of the Armenians. But even the discoveries were already being made that showed a surprisingly high level of development thousands of years ago. And now back to Lake Sivan. The underwater world of Sivan has attracted the attention of researchers and scientists before, but only in the last 4 years have they become seriously interested in the lake. They began to conduct geological research, archaeological excavations, and study of flora and fauna. The reason for this was a team of Armenian divers led by French submariners. Claude Touloumjian, president of the French Union of Underwater Research, a scuba diver with 46 years of experience, and Stéphane Kojoyan, an employee of the University of Toulouse, the leader of the Armenian community there and a professional submariner. It was they who came up with the idea of creating the Armenian Center for Underwater Research and Diving. Archaeologists found the ruins of an ancient settlement of the bottom of Lake Sivan in Armenia. Experts believe that the city was hidden underwater for thousands of years. According to researchers, the underwater city contains stone carved art, some kind of writing, burial places, and even large concrete-like slabs that resemble streets. Other artifacts, such as pottery, various household items, and even bones of domesticated and wild horses have also been found at that site. Lake Sivan has proved to be a treasure trove of archaeology. Some of the world's oldest preserved carts and chariots have been found in burial sites at the shores of Lake Sivan years ago. Hundreds of artifacts found in and around Lake Sivan are now kept in the Institutes of Biology and Zoology of the Armenian National Academy of Sciences. Researchers say that Lake Sivan has only been explored for about 1%, and that hundreds new expeditions are being prepared. Well, we'll see about that. It takes a lot of funding. Armenia is not a rich country. Recently in Armenia, archaeologists found the ruins of an older settlement at the bottom of Lake Sivan. Experts believe that the water hid the found city for more than 12,000 years. I keep going back to this very significant date in my videos about ancient mysteries from different parts of the world. This is the same age as Portasar, Göbekli Tepe, and it is 2 times older than Shashen. What discoveries will still be made there, we'll find out in the near future. I certainly hope so. I'm sure there's a lot there based on my research, my travels, my conversations with intelligent people who are interested in ancient civilizations too. And by the way, in a 6,000-year-old human brain in a cave overlooking the Arpa River in southeastern Armenia, well, a team of archaeologists, international scientists, discovered 3 Copper Age human skulls, each buried in separate space. The skulls belong to 12 to 14-year-old girls. A team in Armenia consisting of 26 experts from Ireland, the United States, and Armenia was digging a cave with 3 graves and came across this preserved human brain. And it was back in 2007. The preliminary results of laboratory analysis prove that it is the oldest human brain so far discovered in the world, according to Dr. Boris Gasparyan, one of the excavation leaders and an archaeologist at the National Academy of the Institute of Science and Archaeology and Ethnology in Yerevan. Of course, the mummies of pharaonic Egypt did contain brains, but this sample is older than the Egyptian ones by about 1,000 to 1,200 years. The humid climate of the cave helped to preserve red blood cells and white blood cells in the discovered remains. And then I want to tell you about some very interesting shrines. 3 shrines dating back about 3,300 years have been discovered within a hilltop fortress at Gegharot in Armenia. Local rulers at the time probably used the shrines for divination, a practice aimed at predicting the future. The archaeologists involved in the discoveries reported. Each of the 3 shrines consists of a single room holding a clay basin filled with ash and ceramic vessels. Wide varieties of artifacts were discovered, including clay idols with horns, stamp seals, censers used to burn substances, and a vast amount of animal bones with markings on them. During divination practices, the rulers and diviners may have burned intoxicating substances and drank wine, allowing them to experience altered states of mind, the archaeologists say. The logic of divination presumes that variable pathways articulate the past, present, and future, opening the possibility that the link between a current situation and an eventual outcome might be altered. According to Adam Smith and Jeffrey Leon, who published an article, I believe in 2015, in the American Journal of Archaeology. Smith was a professor at Cornell University, and Leon was a graduate student there. Excavations at the shrines are part of the American Armenian Project for the Archaeology and Geography of Ancient Transcaucasian Societies, also known as Project Ar-Agats. The shrines were unearthed over a period stretching from 2003 to 2011. Smith told Live Science that the region's rulers probably used Gegharot as an occult center. At the time, writing had not yet spread to this part of Armenia, so the names of the polity and its rulers are unknown. Smith and Leon found evidence for 3 forms of divination at Gegharot. One form was osteomancy, trying to predict the future through rituals that involved rolling the marked up knuckle bones of cows, sheep, and goats like dice. Lithomancy was trying to predict the future through the use of colored pebbles, also appears to have been practiced in Gegharot. And in one of the shrines, the archaeologists found an installation used to grind flour. Smith and Leon think that this flour could have been used to predict the future in a practice called alleromancy. The shrines were in use for a century or so until the surrounding fortress, along with all the other fortresses in the area, were destroyed. The site was already abandoned after this, Smith said, although the rulers who controlled Gegharot put great effort into trying to predict and change the future, it was to no avail. Now let me take you to another very interesting place. Karmir Blur is a hill on the left bank of Hrazdan, a real storehouse of artifacts from the Urartu era. It is thanks to the discoveries made here only in the last century and that turned the idea of the ancient world upside down. The veil of mystery of the history of the 7th century BC and subsequent periods was opened. However, not everyone agrees that Armenia is the successor of the Urartuan culture. However, more recently, archaeologists have found a unique structure in Karmir Blur, including another proof of Armenia's connection with Urartu. In October of 2021, an Armenian-Austrian expedition began excavations on the territory of the hill, which ended a few. I believe it ended in 2022. Works of this scale were last carried out by Boris Piotrovsky. When bronze shields and helmets, bowls with the names of kings, pottery, and even remnants of clothing were found, modern archaeologists have confirmed the theory about the fire in Teishebaini. Its traces have been preserved. However, there were also traces of human life on the territory of the fortress after that. The Urartian period, a time when a significant part of Transcaucasia was part of the Urartian state or was in close relation with it, attracted the attention of scientists for decades. In 1862, Urartian wedge-shaped inscriptions were noticed, carved on the rocks and on stones from ancient buildings, and since 1893, a joint study of cuneiform inscriptions and ruins of ancient fortresses began. This research was mainly exploratory in nature. No excavations were carried out. Everything changed when Boris Borisovich Piotrovsky began to study the Urartian civilization. Since 1930, the scientists participated in expeditions to Armenia. In 1936, a fragment of stone with the inscription of Urartian king Rusa, the son of Argishti, was discovered in Karmir Blur. Then the researchers suggested that there might be ruins of a fortress of the 7th century BC on the hill, and excavations began in 1939. The archaeologists' expectations were justified. A lot of valuable materials have really been preserved in Karmir Blur, which are found to this day. So in the 8th century BC, the power of the Urartian state began to weaken. Around 730 BC, Rusa, the son of Sarduri II, ascended to throne. In addition to the task of reassembling the lost lands, he faced another one, the struggle with the governors of the districts who sought independence. In Transcaucasia, which was divided into several districts, Rusa began to carry out exclusive construction activities. Thus, at least two fortresses appeared on the coast of Sivan. One of them bore the name of the main god of the Urartian pantheon, Haldi, and the other of the god of war, Tei-Sheba. A century later, in the 7th century BC, Rusa II founded the city of Teishebaini of the Karmir Blur hill, which became the Urartian center until the beginning of the 6th century BC. Despite all the efforts of the ruler, the state of Urartu was declining, and a century after the death of Rusa II ceased to exist. Teishebaini was destroyed by fire around the middle of the 6th century BC. The city burned down due to the invasion of enemies. According to the researchers, most likely they were the Scythians. Karmir Blur means red hill, and got its name because of the brick that turned red after the fire. Until now, it was believed that after the storming of the fortress, life in the city did not resume, but a recent discovery has shown that this is not entirely true. We have excavated a huge complex, 24 meters long, 14 meters wide, with powerful walls, 1 meter high, with a paved floor. Horse bones were also found there. This may indicate that the territory served as a royal stable, according to Mikhail Badalyan, director of the Historical and Archaeological Museum Reserve Erebuni. According to him, at the moment, it is the only such facility in Armenia. Similar buildings were previously found in Iran and Israel, but with more meager artifacts. Mikhail Badalyan explained that the find can be compared with the medieval caravanserai that have been preserved in Armenia. Necessary, I would say, resting places, facilities, or rest facilities for travelers. The excavations and what we have discovered are of great importance both for Armenia and the entire archaeological world. The second such structure has not yet been found in our country. According to the director of the museum, who summed it all up, according to him, this find is another proof of the continuity of the Urartu culture by Armenia. You see, the Armenian highlands in the north of the Near East are one of the centers of the emergence of human civilization. Since time immemorial, the first settlements have appeared here, and since the end of the second millennium BC, the process of formation of the Armenian people has begun. However, the territory, which had no natural barriers on all sides, was open not only to trade caravans, but also to the armies of various conquerors from all over the world. Its military, strategic, and commercial importance was one of the causes of conflicts between the powers of the Mediterranean and the Near East. Armenia has been an arena for numerous wars since ancient times, and its people have been a participant in them. Assyrians and the Medes, Scythians and Cimmerians, Parthians, Greeks, and Romans passed through the rocky roads of Armenia. If we return to the official references to the formation of the Armenian state, the facts of the origin of this ethnicity and the country itself are found in the following sources. The Bezistun inscription, which is a cuneiform inscription made in 3 languages, and the date of its creation is 520 BC. Also, one of the first written references to Armenia we find in the ancient Greek writer, historian, at the same time commander of the 5th century BC, Xenophon. His main work, Anabasis, or The Retreat of 10,000, had a huge impact on Greek and Latin literature. The work describes the retreat of 10,000 Greek hoplite mercenaries from Mesopotamia to the north, to the Black Sea, in 401-400 BC. After the unsuccessful battle of Kunax, it was for them, the Greeks went to the sea through Armenia. Xenophon mentions it as a vast and rich country with established society, a clear social hierarchy, and self-government. The locals grew barley and grapes, from which wine and raisins were made. The commander also noted that the country is known for its horses, which were bred for the Persian army. He also mentions its ruler Yervan I, Orontes, the founder of the Yervantid dynasty. But Xenophon walked the roads of Armenia not as a conqueror, but by chance. Other generals found themselves in these places for other purposes. Throughout ancient history, the Armenian state was forced to wage a continuous struggle for independence, both against its closest neighbors and against numerous empire builders who came from the west and east. The Armenian people were under the attack of almost all the conquerors of the ancient world and subsequent eras known in history, but they didn't disappear, besides preserving their faith, language, and traditions. The former conquerors were lost in history, but Armenia remained. At the end of the 19th century, German journalist Magda Neumann, using modern research on the Armenian issue at the time, published a series of important publications, articles under the general heading Armenians. And she said, I want to touch upon the side of the centuries-old life of Armenians, which is of great interest from the point of view of historical criticism and psychological analysis. I'm talking about the political past of the Armenians and the unparalleled steadfastness with which they fought for 40 centuries against the peoples of Asia, Africa, and Europe, withstood the blows of almost all the conquerors of the world, experienced all the horrors of barbaric times, fell, bled, and still survived, and still exist on their ancestral territory. According to literary evidence, there were Indian settlements in Armenia, established by 2 Indian princes, Krishna and Ganesh, escaping from Kanauj, who, along with their families and a large retinue, had arrived in Armenia as early as 149 BC and were allotted land in Taron region, it's now in Turkey, by the then rulers of Armenia. Historians had suggested that when Assyrian warrior queen Semiramis invaded India in 2000 BC, Some Armenians accompanied her, as they probably did Alexander the Great in 326 BC. So you can see connections between ancient civilizations in our world and the influence they exerted in each other. By the way, the world's first textbook of arithmetic problems was created by an Armenian scientist of the 6th century, mathematician David the Invincible. A sample of this book is kept at Matenadaran, the Institute of Ancient Manuscript, named after Saint Mesrop Mashtots, the scholar and monk and creator of the Armenian alphabet. Matenadaran is one of the largest repositories of manuscripts in the world, and it has a very strange ancient map. As for me, I would like to find images of that strange object made of bronze, which was called the image of the universe that I mentioned to you earlier. It may be as interesting as the ancient map of Mars hidden in the Matenadaran. Please see my video on this subject, and because it brings us back to the mysteries of the Martian moons and more. You will find the link in the description to this video. I will talk more about the ancient civilizations of the Caucasus in my future videos. It's a very interesting region, fascinating. If you like my research, please kindly support me through the links you will also find in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel. Please like my videos, and thank you for your attention to my work and your support.